Are you a skeptic like me though? Like, if someone comes up to you and is like, "Hey, I can have this accounting software. It's only $1,200 a month," and you're like, "My guy, no."
Bro, I'm an attorney. I'm a skeptic at everything, right? Like it's what I do.
Hey guys, we're on another episode of Untitled Success. We're here with David Askander with Askander Law. We're gonna hear his story. Again, you guys know that the reason I do this is because I want you guys to know what it takes to start a business. Hopefully this serves again as a blueprint for you guys. And so, David Askander, how you doing, my man?
Good, man. Good to see you.
Good. So the very first question I usually ask people is like, who were you in high school?
Jeez. Taking me back, huh?
I know, bro.
Who was I in high school? I think I was driven, right? I've always been pretty ambitious.
Okay.
I wouldn't call myself a troublemaker. Tried to play some sports. I thought I was better at that time than looking back than I really was, right? But yeah, just played sports, tried to do good in school, try to kind of, get to a good college, right? That was kind of my goal. And just try to be like friendly with everybody. I didn't really have like a group, right, that I hung out with. I was just kind of like ebbing and flowing with everybody. So I guess that's like the best picture of who I was in high school.
Yeah. Were you like an A student, B student, where you're like, okay, I'm kind of just cruising by?
I would say I was like an A- student.
Okay.
Like if I didn't work, I'd be in like the B range, right? But if I worked really, really hard, I'd probably be in like the A range. So I like to kind of stay in the middle, right? I didn't like to work too hard, right? But just enough not to get in trouble with my parents. So I was like an A- student.
A-, okay.
I wouldn't say that I was like super, like, there's like the super bright kids and like, oh, like that's them. I had to work hard for my grades.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Was it easier for Nicole?
Was it easier? No, Nicole definitely had to work harder than me.
She would?
Yeah. Don't tell her this. I think she's smarter than me now.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't tell her this.
I know, right? So yeah, my sister, I would probably say intellectually, she may be actually smarter than me. I think I was a better test taker than her, and I picked it up faster in high school. And I think she was kind of a late bloomer to it.
Gotcha. Okay, so you finished high school. What college did you end up going to?
Yeah, so I went to UCLA.
Getting into UCLA that's something. You can't just get into UCLA. So that means you studied hard.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like put in the work, and there's the cultural expectation of, what we're supposed to do. But it was also like a personal ambition. Like I felt like I wanted to prove something, and I wanted to work hard and wanted to do a good job. I wanted to go to a place that, because to me, I thought that like if I went to a good school, that automatically meant a good job, right? And that automatically meant a good career and a comfortable life. So I found out that wasn't always the case, but the high school version of David, that was the goal, right? Get into a good school, because a good school would mean success. Did
you always want to become a lawyer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the story of how I wanted to become a lawyer is, I tried out for the mock trial team in my freshman year of high school. I didn't make it. And I got really, like, the competitive version of me, or competitive side of me, got really frustrated and bothered. And I was like, I'm going to prove it to them, right? I'm going to become an attorney. And that was really the first time that I thought about like a career path. And I think I was just more naturally inclined to the soft sciences instead of the hard sciences, even though I like the hard sciences, but I was just kind of naturally inclined to like politics and history and English and things like that. So those things just kind of came natural to me. So when I tried out for the mock trial team and I didn't get it, that was the first time that I was like, I'm going to prove it to the system or to the people that cut me that I was going to become an attorney. And that was the first time that I remember saying, this is what I wanted to do. And I just kind of chased that all throughout high school.
But there's nothing else that you wanted to be? Like that was like the first time where you had your sights on becoming a lawyer?
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to be?
So, I mean, from the culture, right? Like it's either a doctor, engineer. Nobody wanted to be an attorney at that time. So I was like, no. I wanted to be, a little bit different. Thankfully, like my parents like kind of supported that. And, but there was an expectation that you're going to do something, right? That like undergrad wasn't enough, that you're going to do something. So like I said, I wasn't really compelled to the hard sciences, so this kind of felt right. And really, actually, I wanted to become an attorney because actually I wanted to go into politics. I was really interested in politics at that time. I loved, like elections and governments and reading the Constitution, and it was just very intriguing to me. And so I remember looking up on Wikipedia one time, like all these politicians and what did they do, and most of them were attorneys prior to serving in public office. So I was like, I'm going to become an attorney so that I can, do that for a little bit of time and then go into politics. And even like in college, I interned with the office of the governor. It was Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger at that time, so that was cool. I got to meet him. He almost crushed my hand. And yeah, I mean, that was the goal. I kind of wanted to be that guy that was like speaking, and I didn't mind speaking in public, and I thought that I would like champion the cause, and obviously I've kind of changed my perspective since then.
Yeah.
But that was really the goal, kind of heading into college, was I wanted to do good, go to good school so I could go to law school, so I could eventually become a politician. But what really the catalyst for it was getting cut from that freshman mock trial team, just kind of feeling this competitive advantage of like, well, I didn't make the team, but I'm going to make it in real life.
So high school owes you.
Big time.
Or you owe high school
I
big
owe high
time.
school, 100%.
So, all right. So we're in UCLA, and we'll skip the college scene for this particular case. But it's like, okay, what was your first job out of college?
I finished college and started law school right away.
Oh, wow.
I guess what I did, actually, to be honest, is I graduated in June, but then I stayed an extra quarter. So I stayed there, studied for my LSATs, took my LSATs in December, and then left UCLA that December, even though I had walked that June before. And then moved back home, and I was home from like the holidays, January-ish, until I started law school in August. So I worked from January until August or so with some family friends.
Yeah.
Just kind of doing some office admin work. If you really specifically want to know, I was doing like appeals for assessors' offices. Like somebody had a building and he wasn't getting taxed properly, so I did the appeals for him. And but it wasn't, I wouldn't really call that like my first job. I didn't really work after college.
So college, law school, you finish law school, and then you start your first law job.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is it something that you wanted to get into the first time around? Was it not something you wanted to get into?
You talking about the first job?
The first job. The first job right after law school.
First job right after law school. Yeah, I wanted it. It was with a contact that I had developed a relationship with while I was in law school, and I had kind of been working that angle for a while. Pretty successful business owner out in San Diego. And he offered me a position to work, and it was kind of to build up into kind of like a general counsel, corporate counsel role. But he was making a position for me. Make a long story short, it was a great job, great people. I had a great time. And I really thought this was it. Like I was going to, hang out with him and kind of help him build his company, and, was going to grow and make a bunch of money. And then he came, after a couple months, he came to me and said, hey, like, stay here for as long as you want, but I don't think this is the right place for you. And so that was really hard because I was still working on stuff and I had all these dreams and visions of what could be. But in hindsight, I'm really also thankful for that, right? Like I've learned a lot of like through my journey and my story is like when doors closed, right? As demoralizing as that was, those were really like new opportunities that were kind of on the horizon. So when he told me that, obviously I was crushed because, I had a hope of what could have been. And when that didn't materialize, it was kind of on to looking for something else. So I stayed with him from August. After I took the bar in July 2013, I started with him in August and stayed until April.
Until April?
Yeah, that was my first job at a law school. I was just kind of doing corporate counsel work and reviewing vendor agreements and contracts, and I thought that, that's what I was going to do. Now, was it into politics? No, but I thought like, okay, it was a step. And that kind of led me to my second job, which
Okay.
assuming you're
Yeah.
there. I was like, well, I went to law school to kind of be a politician and, to be a real attorney. And I feel like I'm not. I'm just kind of staring behind a computer screen and I'm not doing the real attorney thing. So I was like, I think I want to go work for a firm.
Just to kind of track this, so you have one job, two job, and then you start opening up your own spot? Or is
No. So I'll break it down for you. So I started at that guy's office, right, or his company. Worked there for a couple months, and then I worked for a small firm for about 2 years. Kind of cut my teeth, did everything, had no business doing a lot of things, but still learned a lot along the way. And then I worked for a medium-sized firm, stayed there for about 1.5 years, and then I got a really cool opportunity to kind of work in big law, right? Because that's kind of like the cachet and the prestige. So worked in big law for about 2 years, and then at the beginning of 2020, I had a wife, I had 2 kids, and I had my third one yet. So you're kind of you're building, and you're kind of also chasing a paycheck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had this other opportunity that came by for a smaller firm to go work with them. And I was hoping that my current firm, my big law firm, would match the offer, and they didn't. So when they didn't, I went to this other firm, and I hated my life.
Really?
Yeah.
This is in 2020.
This is in the beginning of 2020.
And it's safe to say you're making substantial amount of money as a lawyer at this time.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight, I was doing okay. I guess you'd call that a high income earner, right? 6 figures.
100%.
6 figures. But yeah, and this is right before I went off on my own. I probably had made more money than I had ever made before, right? But, there were obligations, mortgage, kids, lifestyle, and but I hated my job. So I was making the most money I'd ever made, but I hated what I was doing.
So, well, this is going to take me to my next step, right? Because this is the part that I was very curious about, right? As someone who's a father now, right? 2020, you're working. You're working through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then you decide at the Q4, you're basically going to open up your own place.
Yeah.
So just so like everyone understands, because I don't think people understand the complexity of this.
Yeah.
Right? Especially as like me having a kid now, I'm like, you have a wife, you have 2 kids, you have a mortgage, you have a high-paying job, and then you decided, no, I want to open up my own place.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy when you put in that context. But
It's the only context.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you from my position that like when I look at certain jobs and opportunities, I weigh in my family, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sure you did too. 100% you did. But to take that leap, it's a pretty scary leap because you're like, oh, it's not if I fail, I can just go back to mom and dad's house and I'll reassess and do this over again, right? This is like wife, kids, mortgage.
Yeah. I guess in that season of life, my back was against the wall, and I remember like going through a process because I wanted, obviously I had a huge responsibility. If I was single, who cares if I crash and burn, right? But
Right.
if I crash and burn now, I got a lot more on the line. And I remember looking at myself and really thinking about it. And there was a day that I decided, I get to choose whether I'm happy or not. The job doesn't dictate that for me. The amount of money I have doesn't dictate that for me. Like, that's ownership that I got. So once I kind of let go of the fact that, I don't need this job for the money, like maybe there's another way, that was a very freeing feeling. But then the other side of that coin as well, you still have this obligation on the other side. So I remember just kind of like breaking it down and say like, what's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is I got 6 months saved up. I build it up. If I crash and burn, my kids are still young enough right now where I can reinvent myself. I can go get another job, right? Like I position myself educationally to somewhat always be marketable, right? It may take me a couple months, but I can go get another job. This is not the only job, right?
Let me ask you one question though. How was the buy-in from the wife and the family? Because even though you're going to go and I don't want to say you're going to waste 6 months of your savings, but you're prepared to give up 6 months of your savings.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to have your wife's buy-in. You have to have a support system. And so can you talk about those two?
Yeah, man. It's, as I look back, it's kind of a blur, right? Because so much of it happened.
Like having a kid?
Not having a kid, I mean, we had a kid in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I 1000% could not have done this without my wife. I mean, the amount of faith that she had in me and gave me confidence, right? Like when I didn't have that confidence, the fact that she said, we got it, we'll figure it out. I don't know, but I know you work hard for our family. I know you'll make it work. We can, we'll land back on our feet. So I'm very, very thankful, because if she didn't push me in that way, if she made me more anxious, I'm not really quite sure I would have had the confidence and the ability to, because I believed in myself and I believed that I could do it, but I believed here, right? I believed in my mind. I didn't actually know if I could, right? But I feel like she believed it in me before I even saw it in me. And that was everything that I needed, because when you got your partner who's like, hey, whatever cliff you want to jump off of, I'm going to jump off of it with you too. Like you can't lose. Yeah. You really, really can't lose. And I think, again, for me, because my kids were young when I started, that was a big factor, because I thought that if I waited until they were older, their needs financially were going to be a lot more, and I was going to be stuck. Yeah. I was going to feel even more weight and more pressure than I did at that moment. So as a father, I just, when I did the math and calculus, I was like, if I'm going to jump, my time is to jump now. I'll take the risk. Worst thing that can happen is I'm unemployed. Nobody trusts in me to do work for them, and I got to go find another job. And that's 6 months that I burned through savings. It's a tough pill to swallow. Yeah. But that was the floor, right? What was the ceiling? Well, the ceiling was whatever we could make it, right? It was a whole different kind of lifestyle. It was huge opportunities. I mean, when you're, a W-2 worker, right? What's coming in every month, and there's a value to that, but they call it a golden handcuffs for a reason, right? Because you're stuck to that. But when you're self-employed and when you're chasing your dreams, the sky's the limit. Now, it comes with its own different set of responsibilities and stress and sleepless nights and just all the what ifs. But it's
So walk me through. You opened up your firm officially December of 2020, right? But you don't just open up just like that, right? It takes months of preparation. Yeah. So what was the first month of preparation look like? And kind of walk me briefly through I decided, let's say August of 2020, I'm going to open up my firm. I found the very first thing I did was I'm going to find a place to stay at versus I'm going to work in my garage. Yeah. Right. And how did you start? Why did you pick business law and estate planning as your very first two things? So when did you start preparing yourself?
It was the summer of 2020, middle of pandemic. And so the pandemic was rough for a lot of people, right? Yeah. I look back and I actually say it was one of the greatest blessings that happened in my life and in my family's life. Because for the first time, I was able to kind of stop and think. Everybody was home. We're all just kind of spending time with our families. And luckily, I was working during that time. And I just started to think about, hey, what does it look like? What does this transition look like? So it really started kind of materializing in the summer. And part of the reason it was materializing is at this point I had been practicing for 7 years. Mm-hmm. And all along the way I was really good at what I was doing, but I just didn't feel it fit well with my personality. And so I kind of started asking questions from my peers, doing some research online, and I was really tired of the type of law that I was actually practicing. So I actually wanted to reposition practices altogether. So when I started my firm, the business law side of things, I kind of had a good grasp of, but the estate planning side of things, I had done it in the past and I had some experience in it, but I hadn't done a deep dive.
Can you explain to us briefly, like, what's the business law that you take care of? Is that like just opening up S corps, doing all these things?
Yeah. So I'm on the transactional side.
Gotcha.
Right? So think of somebody who, like the whole life cycle of a business. Somebody comes with an idea and wants to protect that idea. They're like, they want to trademark it. They want to start the company. They want to protect their assets, right? All the way through like the consulting phase, which I call it, which is, okay, well, I want to negotiate leases, right? I want to draft a contract. I have issues with my employees, or I have an employee. What do I do? Do I need an employee handbook? Like all the types of business consulting that a business owner may have a lot of questions about, but they just don't know where to go.
Gotcha.
And then all the way till the end, which is either shutting the business down for whatever reason, selling the business, merging it with somebody else. So that's all on the transactional side. And I came from a litigation background where we were fighting these issues in court. And so I bring that experience with me of like, okay, what do these things look like actually in court and in depositions and in discovery motions and all these things, and kind of bring a practical application for the business owner, because at the end of the day, the business owner, you know, it's all dollars and cents for them, right? Like, is this profitable? Is this not profitable? And so I try to bring like a real world approach of like, hey, well, what does litigation look like? Mm-hmm. And how do we prevent it? Or hey, we're in the middle of it. What should we do? So that's on the business side of things, but I also felt that there was a huge market of people in the estate planning world that weren't getting touched. And what I mean by that is business owners build businesses and they're focused on generating profits, but they don't really think about, okay, well, what happens when I don't work, right? What happens if, God forbid, the worst case happens to me and this thing that has been feeding our family for so long, and I'm the one that's the owner operator doing everything, what happens to my family? Or, hey, I have a child that's coming up. How do I make sure I kind of pass this along to keep the legacy going? So that's one component of the estate planning. The other component is, hey, there's a lot of people that work hard that have a home, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, and they have no idea what happens if they pass or if they're sick, and how does it go to their kids? How do they protect their kids from probate? And all these, you know, fun things that I do every single day. And from a culture background, speaking Arabic, I said, you know, like, there's so many people who don't understand the value of what estate planning can do for them if they plan in advance. And so I saw an untapped market. I saw the fact that most people do estate planning are probably older, right? They can't connect with some people from the same community. And I said, hey, I'm in my mid-30s at this time, so let me dive deep into this thing, because probably most people that need to do estate planning or asset protection have probably built some stuff, right? Have some assets, and I'm probably as old as their kids. So chances are, you know, when they need somebody to go to, they want somebody that's younger than them. And I saw this as an opportunity to kind of enter into this space and kind of use social media and make this area more approachable and more appealable to, you know, a demographic that a lot of estate planning attorneys and business attorneys don't really tap into.
So did you lean in towards the Egyptian community?
I did. I mean,
because most people run away.
Yeah, that's
no offense to our people or in any way, shape, or form.
I love our people, man. They are tough clients. You know, I kind of think about it like this. In some ways, I'm very, very thankful of who I am. I'm very thankful of, you know, the culture that I have. I'm very thankful of the things that my parents have done. And so in one way, this is a way for me to give back, right?
Gotcha.
It comes at a cost because they can be very, very challenging clients. But it's changing, right? And they need somebody that they can go to. And so I really do enjoy serving that community, despite how challenging it could be sometimes. But I like having a mix, right? They're not, in the beginning, right? They were a much bigger percentage of my client base, of my book.
So I want to ask you a question right there. How did you find your first client, and how did they trust you and say like, hey, David has a lot of credibility, I should be going with him?
So the way I started, I guess this is kind of back to your question, right? Started thinking about it in summer. Mm-hmm. First month I was just kind of working at home, and what I really did is I did a deep dive into estate planning, and I kind of I got all the skills and resources and like, how do I get good at this? So I spent some time in those first 6 months of, testing the waters, getting good at what I do and learning more and becoming more proficient at it. I actually drafted my first thing that I did after I kind of did that deep dive is I drafted a letter, right? To all the people that I thought that would want to use me as clients, family, friends, close relatives, people that were kind of in your sphere of influence, right? And I said, hey, I'm going to send this out and I'm going to just tell everybody, Askander Law Firm is open for business. This is what we do. This is what we're about. And so I did that. And people were very receptive.
Really?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people were very encouraging. That didn't mean it meant anything, right? Monetarily.
Yeah.
But it made me feel like, oh, like we're happy for you. And what's interesting is the people that you think will become your clients don't become your clients. But then people that weren't really front of mind or top of mind just kind of come out and say like, I have this issue. And then they start talking to me about it. So one of the first clients was actually a family friend of ours, and I'll never forget it. He wrote me a check for $5,000, and I was like, what are you doing, right? Like, why are you cutting me a check for I wouldn't cut myself a check at that time for $5,000. But he was very, very gracious, and I'll never forget that check that he cut me because like this was like the beginning. I remember depositing that check in and be like, wow, like this is all mine.
Yeah.
Now, little did I know how many expenses needed to come out afterwards, but it still felt like,
I earned that.
I earned it.
Yeah.
And so he was a family friend, kind of one of those people who was excited about me for starting. And that's how the first client, it came out through that marketing letter, and I kind of just blasted it on social media, and people started to kind of hear, but it didn't really materialize much. It took some time after that.
So are you kind of like me? Like, I'm not really good at social media. Like,
I hate social media. Man. I really, really do. I really have it because like Instagram's kind of like my family photo album now.
yeah.
There's a lot of power and a lot of value to it. Maybe I hate it. It's a strong word. I hate that constant need to always have to create and put things out. I want to be much more organic. But, like in today's world, if you're not doing it, you're behind the eight ball. So,
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's something I'm trying to focus more on. I thought I would be further along at this stage of my life, at this stage of my career in terms of like the social media presence. But it's probably because it's a good problem is I got too busy doing other work that I haven't had time to build this aspect of it up.
Yeah. What were the first challenges or the biggest challenges that you had in the first year of your law firm? Accounting?
Like, I filed my taxes wrong. I was too late. I was too late to file my S Corp election, right?
Okay.
So
after November?
Not after November. I think within like a couple months of forming your company.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
You have to make an S Corp election, which is like the 2553 form or something like that. Don't quote me on that. I know a little bit more now. But there's an election that you need to make a few months after opening, and I missed it. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know that businesses, I thought everybody files taxes on, April 15th. I didn't know that businesses need to file their taxes in March 15th. And I remember sitting at a memorial service, and my brother-in-law sitting next to me, and he's talking to his CPA about filing stuff. He's like, bro, did you file tax? I'm like, I didn't know we had to do that. Literally get on the phone with his CPA. He wasn't even my CPA at the time, and he just filed the extension for me right there and then.
So October or whatever, yeah.
And so, it was like the accounting, the taxes were tough.
Are you a skeptic like me though? Like if someone comes up to you and is like, hey, I can have this accounting software, it's only $1,200 a month, and you're like, my guy, no.
Bro, I'm an attorney. I'm a skeptic at everything, right? Like it's what I do.
So how did you value certain things, and how did you say no? This is not, because for me, if I'm starting my own business, I'm going to try to do a lot of things myself, right? Quickly, do I realize when I talk to business owners, they're like, I should have delegated a lot of this work quickly.
It's also one other layer. It's like things cost money, and you don't know in the beginning if you can justify that expense. So some things that are really nice and shiny and work, you may be priced out, and some things cost less, and it may work, but it may not work as well, right? So I just try to use my best intuition and judgment and ask a lot of questions, and probably a lot of stupid questions. Until I got to a place to where I felt like I could wrap my head around it. Because especially in the beginning, you don't know if anything is sustainable, right? You don't know what next month looks like. And so you don't want to spread yourself way too thin, but then there's tools that you need to help make your job a little bit easier. Like, I don't want to be sitting there, manually inputting, checks in and checks out, like, and doing a balance sheet like that. We have technology to use to our advantage. So I think to answer your question is, I did a lot of research and asking questions, and sometimes maybe too much research. But I got to a point to where I felt like I was comfortable making this decision, and that, if it didn't work out, it was okay. At least, like, I felt like I did my best. And then what I realized too is you can change almost anything, right? Like,
okay.
I tried, a software, gave it a real good shot. And after a year, I moved to something else. It worked, but it didn't work the way that I liked to. And so, was it hard to transition? Absolutely. But was there some hiccups along the way? Yeah, but.
If you look at your career up till now, how many times do you think you had to pivot? Was it constantly pivoting from the software to the clients to?
You're talking about since I opened up the firm?
Yeah.
I would say there's like big pivots, right? There was the pivot of starting, right? There's the pivot of hiring your first employee, right? There's the pivot of taking on a bigger lease. There's the pivot of taking on debt, right? And is this wise? So I think for me, there's probably been, I feel like I'm pivoting every month, but I think your question is like the big pivots, right?
Yeah.
I'd probably say like every other quarter, there's a real solid pivot. I feel like I'm transitioning. I think there's more pivots earlier on because it's so dynamic, right? Things are ebbing and flowing, and you don't know, if it's sustainable. You don't know, but you're growing, and you start getting to the point to where you're like, you believe in yourself because you see that other people are believing in you, and you find that there's value and that there's like something solid to this business and it's sustainable. And then it's like, all right, so you get a little bit more confident. When you get a little bit more confident, you kind of take the next step, right? And you kind of build and you grow, and it's like, no, like there is a value here. People like what you're doing. People believe in what you're doing. People are bought in.
Well, speaking of people believing in what you're doing, right? One of the things that you have to do is a balancing act between endless nights at work, right? A demanding career, and being a father.
Yeah.
Right? And so take me through that balancing act, because you have your firm in 2020, so that means you have 2 kids. Your third kid was in 2022, I believe.
Correct, yeah.
Right? So you're 2 years in. So you have 3 kids. I barely make it with 1 kid. Okay? So you have 3, my man.
Yeah.
So what does that balancing act look like for a demanding?
Part of the reason why I went off on my own, I wouldn't say I was always like entrepreneurial. It always kind of like felt like a good idea. I just don't know if I actually like materialized it in my brain. There's some people that always know they want to be a business owner. It kind of felt like something that was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't really real. And so when this happened, it kind of happened out of necessity, and the family was also growing. But part of the reason I made the transition was because I didn't want to have to explain myself to anybody. I got tired of that. Like, I'm a working professional. If I want to take time off, I want to take time off. If I want to calendar certain times to be off, like, I don't want to have to explain myself to that. For some people, that's not a big deal. For me, it was a big deal. And I was very thankful, actually, for most of my jobs. I really didn't have to explain myself much.
Yeah.
But if I just wanted to take time off, I didn't want to feel like I had to miss anything. And I always wanted to be a family man. Like that's for me is my first job, right? Like, if I'm not there for my family, for my wife first and foremost, and then for my kids, like, I haven't done what I needed to do as a man. So I always have to remind myself, like, that's my number one job, and then my career follows second. And sometimes that's hard. And thankfully, I have a very accommodating wife that understands the pressures. But yeah, there are nights when you got to stay up late and do things, or you got to go in on the weekends. And it's a constant pressure, constant balancing act. I don't want to miss doctor's appointments, right?
Right.
I don't want to miss going to Disneyland with my kids. Like, I want to create memories for them. I want them to know that dad, like, was coaching their things, like, once they get to that point. But it comes at a cost.
So somehow you decided that you wanted to fit in fatherhood first and then career second. So if the kid has a basketball game, a football game, whatever the case may be, you're going there first and then trying to work everything around that.
Yeah, I mean, this is my story, right? Like,
Yeah.
everybody's story is a little bit different. I probably initially, like, in terms of bringing home money, if I would have stayed as a salaried employee, so I'm 4 years in, probably first year or two, I would have made way more money. But the amount of time that I was able to spend at home and still kind of get close, I was like, this is a no-brainer, right? Like, I'm working hard, but I'm also more available for my family. That was kind of like in the beginning. Now, what I'm realizing is, as the firm is growing, so is the expectation and the responsibility, and so is, like, the pulling of myself. And, like, I'm finding myself in today's world, like, my bandwidth, right? I'm reaching the capacity for my career. And so I need to start scaling it in a different way, and that's kind of what I'm presently figuring out. But still, the demands at home are also increasing, right? It's, now we have, different activities after school that I want to go to. And so I really try to pick and choose where I could be at, but what I found is that if I'm not oriented at home properly, I'm not going to be right at work. And if I'm so focused at work that my home life is a mess, right? What did I really accomplish? So what I'm trying to say is, it is a balancing act, and I'm trying to learn where my priorities are. Sometimes I don't get it perfect, but I really do try to prioritize my family and being there, and I try to juggle work where I can. And it is a challenge, constant. I'm always feeling like there's weight and there's work, and the task list and the to-do list is never ending. Like, you just want to cross things off, and after you cross one thing off, there's 13 other things that are waiting for you. But I think it's just getting comfortable in the chaos, kind of being there where you can. But I think for me, just to kind of sum it all up, like, I'm a dad first, I'm a husband first, I'm an attorney second, I'm a business owner second. So I want to make sure I'm there, and part of the reason why I went off on my own is so that I can make sure that I'm there and I don't have to ask anybody else.
Gotcha.
Now, sometimes the demands of work change and you got to be flexible, but there's so much flexibility with being self-employed. Like, you can take time off when you want to. It doesn't just have to be weekends. It can kind of be a couple days in the week, and then you work on the weekends. Or there's just so much there.
Let me ask you a question, because I think we've both been in this light of things, right? So you're able to start a business, able to balance, right? I've seen where my parents had a restaurant, and there was no balancing act whatsoever.
Yeah.
We had to be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And you've had family that have restaurants,
Yeah.
and understand, like, they're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So how did you figure out, like, hey, that's I don't want that,
Yeah.
right? Like, the return on investment is not there. Sure, like, they may make a lot of money and so forth and yada, 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 but it's like, the return on investment for me is not worth it.
Yeah.
So how did you look at other people's experience and be like, okay, this is kind of where I want to be in?
I don't really have, like, a clear answer. Like I said, it felt kind of intuitive. Like, my parents didn't have that lifestyle, right? Like, they were both salaried employees, and they didn't have crazy hours. But then I saw people who did have crazy hours, or I had friends who maybe had more than we did, but their parents weren't necessarily present. So I was always just very cognizant of that, like, having money doesn't mean presence. And I would love to have both,
Yeah.
right? But if I have to choose one, I would choose presence over the financial means. And, you know, I did learn pretty quickly that like money doesn't equal happiness. So just because you have more money doesn't mean you're more content and happy. And, you know, these kids, man, like they change so fast.
Yeah.
And there's so many fleeting moments with them. And it's like you want to like capture every single time, because as soon as you get used to one version of them, boom, they're off to another version, right? And it's like, I just got used to you, bro. Like, how are you already like talking like a teenager? Like, when did this happen? And having opinions, like, where is this coming from? But I never wanted to miss out on that as much as I could, right? Now, obviously,
Right.
there's some things that you just can't avoid, and, you know, like, there's Saturdays where I have speaking engagements or things where you got to stay late at, and like, thankfully there's a balance there. There is a sacrifice there.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say there's no sacrifice. There's sacrifice, but because I sacrifice in these areas, I know that I could be at other things and I don't have to feel guilty for them, right? I know, like last Friday, like I left work at 2:00 so I could go to Disneyland with my kids, right? And we spent Friday night at Disneyland, like, but I planned my life according to that, right? And like, I didn't feel guilty going there because like I know I grinded and did a whole bunch of other stuff that I needed to do.
Yeah.
Now, could I have used that time to finish work? Sure, but work will always be there.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think for me, I was just cognizant that like people that are overworked, work will always be there. And it's just trying to find that messy balance in the middle. Thankfully, I don't have a job that's like a restaurant that has like set hours, so I can ebb and flow. But being an attorney, you know, like they burn that midnight oil, you know, and that's also another reason why I specifically and intentionally chose the practice areas that I chose, because while it may not be the glitziest, right? I may not be a fancy PI lawyer, but, you know, I'm still at most of the things I need to be at for my family, for my church, right? For my community. I'm still present in my family and my kids' lives. Like, I think overall that's more valuable to me.
How much has church played in the way that you move from opening up to your business versus the challenges that you had versus, you know, saying like, hey, I should just quit and just go back to a W-2 job and not have this stress?
Yeah, I mean, I've never, and I'm not ashamed to say this, I don't think in my career I ever really had to practice faith until
Okay.
I went off on my own.
Gotcha.
Until I went off on my own, and you literally don't know what next month looks like, but you have these expenses that they're coming in, whether you like it or not. I never really had to rely so much on my faith as I do now, and it's you're white knuckling it, man. Like, but that's also the beauty of it, right? Is like you see, you know, God's grace, right? Like show up day in, day out. When you're like, man, I don't know, I'm doing my best, right? Like I have this formula that makes sense for me now. I'm not sure if it's for everybody, but it makes sense for me. Like, you got the favor of God, you have integrity, and you work hard, you can't fail. You can't fail. You work hard, try to do a good job, you got God's favor, like, can't fail.
Everything else is pretty much out of your control at that point.
Yeah, I mean, but you got to grind, you got to hustle, you got to put in the work. You can't leave any stone unturned, right? And that's what I'm really passionate about, is like you got to go after it. You can't say no to opportunities, and you know, you can have some days when you're kind of slacking off a little bit, but then like there's people that are depending on you, right? Now I have employees that are depending on me, right? That's another crazy feeling, is like the work that I do feeds other families. Like, that's a crazy concept.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find very humorous, right? When I was doing my home in a different city, and I was like building the home, I was stressing because I was tapped out. I was tapped out. And my father-in-law is like, hey, don't worry about it. I'm like, what do you mean don't worry about it? Bro, like, we're tapped out. He's like, Rabbina Hebat, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
For those who don't know what that means, God will send something. Like,
Yeah.
So he says Rabbina Hebat, and I'm like, dude, I can't sleep at night.
Yeah.
right? Fast forward 4 years or 3 years after, I'm like looking at that moment as what a funny moment of you stressing, because it was figured out anyways.
Yeah.
Like it ended up where like the refinance cash out came on just in time. We were able to figure it out. Do you have a moment throughout this whole process where you're like, you look back at it and you're like, what a funny, like David, what a funny moment that you were stressing about this?
I mean, it's moments, right?
Like I'll never forget the one where I'm sleeping and my father-in-law is asleep, sound asleep, and I can't sleep. Like I literally cannot sleep.
Yeah.
And I look back at that moment and I'm like, what a silly moment.
Yeah.
So there's got to be one where you can pinpoint and look at and be like, that was a pretty funny moment looking back at it.
Yeah. So my wife and I made a decision that we wanted to send our kids to private school, right? And so that's a whole.
It's a mortgage.
Yeah, it is.
Let's be clear.
It is, and that was just something that we both kind of felt passionate about. We said, we'll cut back where we can cut back, but this is like a priority for us. And I remember going to their school and the orientation, it just like felt very, very like, this is what we should do. Like I never, sometimes you're confused about the decision that you make. Never, I won't say never, but few times in my life that I feel like this is exactly what I should be doing. I don't know forever, but at least in the season, this is the right decision to make. Not for everybody, but for my wife and I, it's a decision to make. And I remember walking out and being like, God, like you got to provide. Like, my heart, what I want. You got to provide. And I remember like stressing about that. And I tell my wife this all the time, like, I'm not a big budgeter. I probably shouldn't be saying this, right? Like, I'm not somebody that sits there and like writes everything down and I know to the penny. That's just me, right? I got to be true to myself. I'm trying to get better at it, but that's just me. But I tell my wife, it's like every month it's like magic. Like when we had our first kid, I don't know how we can afford him, right? But we made it work. When we had our second, when we had our third, it's like magic. We had to add a mortgage on top of that, it's like magic, right? Add school on top of that, it's like magic. Like, I don't know, but I remember stressing out about like, how can we afford this? Like, how can we make this work on top of everything else that we've got going on? And I always go back to that because I always have to remind myself like, hey, like look back at what you were so stressed about, what were you so worried about? And see how like you've been sustained and see how month after month, like you've made it work. Like sometimes I have to remind myself like, bro, like you've been doing this for 4 years. It's not a long time, but it's not a flash in the pan either. Like it's been sustainable and it's been like on a trajectory up. And sometimes you don't see it month after month, but you take a look at the quarter and be like, oh, okay, that was a pretty good quarter. You look at the year like, we made that much? Where does it go? I mean, sometimes it's hard to see, because there's just a lot when it comes to business, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot comes out, but like when you kind of take a step back and you look and you see like all the blessings that have come along the way, or all the things that you stressed about and you were so worried about, and all the sleepless nights. And I think it's good because those things keep you sharp.
Yeah.
I just came out of a season where I think I got a little bit comfortable.
Okay.
I had some clients and things were going good, and I think I got a little bit cozy, and then one of the clients kind of shook me up a little bit, and I was like, oh, like.
Not giving too much detail, but like what made you shake up?
So the nature of my business is I have some clients that do hourly work, some clients are flat rate, and some clients are just on monthly retainers. So those monthly retainers, they use me as like ongoing general counsel type work. So one of them was like, hey, we don't know if we want to, and it's like a year contract. We don't know if we're going to continue. We don't know what's going to happen. And it just, like it kind of shook me a little bit. I think I kind of got too comfortable with the consistency of things. And I stopped, like I had lost just a little bit of my edge. And so I'm glad that happened because it kind of reinvigorated something inside of me again. And, always looking, always grinding, always, talking to people, always, seeing who needs help, knocking on, I don't mean like physically like knocking on doors, but like, just trying to get out there and make moves. Like I'm still in the hustle and grind stage of my career. Like it's not time to coast at all.
If you went back to 2020, right? December of 2020, what advice would you give David then?
I would say believe in myself more, right? I've always been like pretty confident in what I could do, but there was a lot of moments of self-doubt. There was a lot of moments of, can I make this? Do people like what I have to offer? Do they like me? Do they believe in what I'm saying? I've always kind of had a little bit of an imposter syndrome, right? Where I always felt like I was good at it, but somebody's going to expose me. And yeah, I would say like it's okay to have that, because I think some of that keeps you humble and keeps you sharp. But I would say believe in myself a little bit more.
Okay. I have to ask this question. I think your business is doing relatively well. What's the first thing that you bought yourself selfishly?
Selfishly? I'll say two things.
Okay.
So one thing I'm buying for my business.
Oh, okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Is a fish tank.
Okay.
So growing up, I've always loved like salt reef tanks. And I even had one when my wife and I first got married, and it was pretty hard to keep up with. But I've always loved it. I love the ocean. I love tropical fish. So that's one thing that I'm actually literally in the process of getting for the office, which I'm pretty excited about that, because that's always been a dream of mine that I wanted. And so to be able to put it in my office is pretty cool. Another aspect of that is like, my kids come to my office and I want them to always like see like, oh, like that was something cool that like as they grow up, like, oh, dad always had like a cool fish tank. So that's one thing on the business side. On a personal side, I did buy myself a nice watch. I love watches. It was hard to get. Okay. But yeah, I just pulled the trigger on it a couple months ago.
Oh man.
So
one of the final things I wanted to ask you is like, if someone's watching this and they're like, hey, like a lot of the things that you feel, a lot of people feel. Like, hey, like I can start this business, but I wouldn't call it imposter syndrome. It's like, there's someone else who's always going to do it better than I can, right?
Yeah.
So what would you tell these people if they're ready to take the plunge to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, great question. I would say it's easier than you think, but also harder than you think. And I'm now in the position that the making money is easy, right? And I don't mean that arrogantly. Like, there's a market share, right? If you have something that somebody wants and you create and it's a good product, and you got good customer service, like it'll take time, right? People got to know, what you're about and what you do, but that part is pretty easy, right? It's sustaining it that's hard. So I would say like, don't make the mountain bigger than it already is, right? Just take a step or two and kind of see where it goes, right? But it's also one of those things that you kind of got to dive in. Like for me, where I'm really thankful is I didn't have a plan B. Right? I guess my plan B was maybe get another job, but it wasn't like something I can do while I was working, right? Because that's really hard to do. You have kind of one foot in, one foot out. It's like you just got to dive into the deep end and believe in yourself, and like the money comes, right? Like if you do something good, whatever product or service, if you do it good with enough time, people are going to find out about it, and people talk because people want that good product or that good service. So it's not as hard as we make it sound. So like, don't make the mountain bigger than it really is. But at some point, you do just got to dive in and kind of rip off the Band-Aid.
Yeah. Okay. If you pass today, what are the things that you want to instill in your kids?
Be a man of your word, right? There's a dying art in, saying what you say and meaning what you're going to do. And so I would want my kids to be proud of the work that I did, to do honorable work, right? But to work hard and just to be a man of what they say. So if they're going to do something, they do it. I mean, you can never knock somebody, right? If they're always honest, right? If they always say what they're going to do, and that's a high standard, but they're always honest and they always say what they're going to do, you can't knock that person, right? You can't take them down off that horse. So if that's what I want to instill in my kids, I want them to instill like, hey, like when they look up to dad, he worked hard, right? He did good work, and he had a reputation that preceded himself. And I hope that they would say that, he really cared for others, and they would see that in the work. They would see that in like the ministry. They're like, hey, we don't charge everybody, right? Sometimes like we gotta help the single mom who needs to protect her assets, and she has 3 kids and she doesn't have anybody that she could depend on.
I love that. I really do, actually. The question I give everyone at the very end of the interview, right? I've asked 5, 6 people on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I've asked several people outside of podcasts, right? And so I asked them, I'm like, hey, if I told you to close your doors right now and be a full-time lawyer for me, and I'll pay you whatever amount of money you want. Let's say $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. Are you taking that deal?
No. I mean, whatever I ask is a big qualifier, right?
Okay.
Because that's obviously going to come. Now I'm going to be an attorney, right? That's going to come with a lot of conditions, and what do I got to do to make that $10 million, right? Is there a price? Sure, there's a price, right? To make me work for you.
Okay.
But it'd be a really, really, really high price. Like, there are so many intangibles that come with being self-employed, for example, right? So many things that you could do on your taxes for your business that you can't just do on a personal side, right? There's a reason why those laws and those codes and those regulations are in there. So you get to take advantage of some of those things that you couldn't do otherwise. The flexibility, the autonomy. Maybe most importantly is one of the reasons I would tell you no is because I really find a lot of value in working with my clients and picking them, right? If your vision and your beliefs were not aligned, I don't have to take you on as a client, right? But if you work for somebody, you have to take that person on. So at some point, maybe a certain amount of money, you pay me like what they play some of these athletes, right? We'll talk. But apart from that, no, I'm chilling, man. I'm really happy doing what I do.
And lastly, give me 3 things that people should know about your business. Like when it comes to estates, when it comes to business law. You're still on the transactional side, right?
Yeah.
Or for people that are listening and they're like, hey, okay, what is estate planning? Like, and briefly kind of break it down, like why you should need estate planning.
Yeah. So our new slogan is that we're here for all your tomorrows, right? So something I want people to know about us is that we are a firm that really cares about our clients, right? I'd like to say we hand select them. We don't work with everybody, but we want to work with the type of clients that also want to work with us, and we collaboratively work together, right? We want to protect your assets. We want to be here for your family, and we want to be here, right, when we don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. I would say we're very family-centered, right? So when we treat our clients, we treat them with the utmost respect. We'll take L's when we don't need to take L's just to make clients happy, right? Probably the last thing is it's a lot more complicated than you're giving it credit. So be a little bit patient with us when we ask questions, when we go through details, but because when we prepare documents, when we do things for you, you're not going to be here when we need to materialize these contracts. So the details, the nitty-grittiness of it, it's there for a purpose, and the complexities are there for a purpose. So don't just tell me, oh, it's just documents. Why am I paying X amount of dollars for this? Well, those documents mean something, and they're going to have value when you're not here.
Gotcha. So, David,
yeah,
thank you, my man.
Appreciate you, bud.
Appreciate you. Me, thank you guys for joining us for Untitled Success. You guys heard David. David, if you want to give a quick shout out to your business and where they can find you. And
Well, thank you guys for having me on today. So I work at Askander Law Firm where I'm the managing attorney. You could follow us on Instagram or Facebook, LinkedIn. Website's askanderlaw.com, and we specialize in estate planning and business law.
awesome. We're on the outro. Thank you guys.